All right, folks, the Heaven Will Protect Viewer's Guide, pages 10 through 12. Page 10, the uprising of the 20,000. In 1909, immigrant shirtwaist workers like Ida and Angelica led a major strike called the Uprising of the 20,000, as you see in the video, that revealed to the public the low pay, harsh supervision, and unsafe conditions that plagued garment workers. To achieve their goals, the strikers had to assemble a coalition that crossed ethnic, gender, and class lines. When the strike began, the Garment Workers Union, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, ILGWU, was tiny and weak, but it still exists. Many labor leaders thought that organizing a union among women was futile, it was a waste of time. But the strike proved this notion false. It was the female strikers' courage, confronting police arrest and beatings by hired thugs, that won the public's heart. Employers hired prostitutes to taunt picketers and to try and associate them with the prostitutes, knowing that working women feared falling into the brutalized life of the streets. Judges and police also preyed on the young women's fears through sexual harassment and severe prison sentences. All right, page 11. The striking women were supported by male ILGWU members, Socialist Party activists, and community organizations that helped strikers' hungry families. The strikers' other key ally was Progressive Women, the Women's Trade Union League. Make sure you jot down, this was the Progressive Women, the Settlement House female progressives that were more helpful, the WTUL, a group of college students and prominent New York women. Founded in 1903, the WTUL united middle and upper class women's activism aimed at winning the vote. They united that activism with working women's struggles in the workplace. So they saw their own suffrage, i.e. democracy, equal to that of the workplace democracy for working class women. This unusual alliance across class lines drew the attention of the mainstream press to the strikers' plight. Now, having said that, there still was a classist blind spot. For example, one of the ways progressive women tried to, quote, uplift and help working class women was by having weekly or monthly book clubs. All right. And, these working class women would show up to these book clubs not having read what they were supposed to have read. And the progressive women would get frustrated and couldn't, why wouldn't they take this help? Not thinking about the fact that these women didn't have time. Working class women didn't have time to read because they were too busy working and doing double duty at home, whereas the progressive women were not. Ethnicity shaped many workers' responses to the strike. Young Jewish women, some with family ties to the Socialist Bund in Russia, spearheaded the strike, while some Italian women joined the strike. Fear of losing their jobs and the ILGWU's failure to organize in the Italian community led others to break the strike or scab. So generally speaking, historically speaking, Jewish immigrants were more active in unions than Italian immigrants. All right, and they tended to be more left-leaning too. Okay, and you can see that in the film. All right, where Ida is more supportive of the union and more active than Angelica. Similarly, some African American seamstresses, blocked from employment by racism and ignored by unions, took the jobs of striking workers. So again, if you were an employer and your white workers went on strike, that's when you would call African Americans. And that would create a rift between the white workers and the African American workers. And you benefited from that as the owner. Okay. The strikers and the union held together enough of a coalition to win important gains from 300 companies. At Triangle Shirtwaist, a shirtwaist company, one of the biggest shops, women won a 52-hour week and a 12 to 15% wage increase. But Triangle and other larger companies rejected workers' safety demands, remember that, and refused to recognize the union as the workers' representative. Remember, ownership still had the legal ability to ignore the union if they wanted to. It was not until the New Deal where they could no longer ignore the union. Later strikes, in the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Fire led to union recognition and the passage of state and city laws forcing industry-wide reform. So 1911 there was a tremendous tragedy in Manhattan at the Triangle Shirtwaist factory, which was in one of the higher floors in a building in Manhattan. It took place in 1911. The doors were locked, the windows were nailed shut, and the women had no way to get out. All right, and they burned and suffocated to death. And that was the consequence of not giving in to any safety demands. And after that, New York City legislated greater safety at the workplace. That was the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. Learning from its mistakes, in the 1909 strike, the ILGWU built a more multi-ethnic union by hiring Italian organizers. Though firm commitment to black workers was slower in coming, and women were long denied union leadership positions, by 1920, the ILGWU claimed more than 100,000 members and was one of the nation's most powerful industrial unions. Okay, so let's read the Seeing is Believing page, page 12. So most of the images in the video are photographs taken at the turn of the century. To understand these photos and the ways visual images shape public attitudes, it is helpful to explore ways that the original photos advanced reform movements at the turn of the century. Soon after photography's invention in 1839, people began taking pictures of American cities. But initially it was all cupcakes and gumdrops. But city photographs did not provide an objective view of urban life. Here's what I mean. Early urban photography focused on grand buildings, park views, street vistas, right? All pretty things. Few photographers depicted the life of and labor of the working class. Up to the end of the 19th century, even as picture-taking technology improved, photographers avoided unpleasant subjects such as poverty or industrial work. So the last two paragraphs, during the 1880s, this changes. Progressive photographers. Newspaper reporter Jacob Riis, remember his name, Jacob Riis, used photography to reveal, quote, how the other half lives. That was his phrase in his book that he published. That was the name of the book, How the Other Half Lives. With the aid of newly invented flash powder, Riis went into dark alleys and basement rooms to reveal poverty and hardship. Riis's pictures encouraged the passage of laws to improve social conditions. But as this photography of a Mulberry Street gang indicates, the picture you see here, his photographs depicted the poor as dangerous and as a threat to decent citizens. So again, this is typical of a male progressive reformer, where he took the immigrants' photographs and made them look ominous and dangerous. And also some of his pictures were posed, which took away from the authenticity of, obviously, the authenticity of the images. All right, so that's Jacob Riis. All right, he's pretty well known. Let's get to the last paragraph. We'll learn about Lewis Hine, who I think was a more effective photographer of the working class. In the 1900s, social documentary photographers like Lewis Hine began to look at immigrants and workers in a different way. Hine's pictures also powerfully documented oppressive working and living conditions, yet he portrayed his subjects sympathetically. If you look at this picture here on the bottom left, all right, Italian immigrants on a ferry, 1905. All right, that's a Lewis Hine photograph. They don't look dangerous and stuff like that, especially compared to the Jacob Riis photograph on the top right. Okay, excuse me. So the work of the documentary photographers of the progressive era strengthened the movement for social change. So again, these progressives took pictures, published magazine articles, published books in an attempt to reform things like working class living and working conditions, meatpacking industry, urban corruption, things like that. The poverty they portrayed was no different than earlier images of urban hardship, but the ways they showed the poor, like Lewis Hine, reshaped public understanding of why reform was necessary. It was meant to expose what was happening, because people up top or even in the middle tend to not realize what's happening to people on the bottom.